this and the cryptocurrency space. I am your host, Piter, your friendly neighborhood Bitcoin maxi, joined as always by Ozzy, the Ethereum-loving degen. There's a lot to get to, so let's jump right in. Please do your own research. This is not financial advice. So the big news this week, SPF found guilty. When the FTX collapsed, a sign of the bear market, the bottom of the bear market. After just 4 hours of deliberation, SPF was found guilty on 7 charges, including fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering on Thursday. The sentencing hearing is on March 28th. He could face up to 115 years in prison. It's unclear at this time if the judge will seek to impose the maximum penalty. There is the question of future charges. The U.S. government needs to tell the judge if it will pursue the 5 additional charges it filed against Sam Bankman-Fried, including campaign finance charges. There is a bit of drama and conspiracy about these charges, as the initial December 2022 indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice included the campaign finance charge. However, the Bahamas declined to extradite Sam Bankman-Fried on that particular charge. In August, the Department of Justice filed a new indictment against the former FTX CEO, alleging that he donated roughly $100 million in politicians. And it is also alleged, it's been circulating on X or Twitter, FTX and Alameda were together, SPF, FTX, and Alameda were together the second largest donor to the Biden campaign, and that he may pardon him or something like that, but that's all speculation. But a good sign, SPF being found guilty for the market?
Definitely good sign. I think it doesn't really have a huge splash. Let's be frank with everybody. It's happened quietly under the radar. And in the big scope of things, I don't think it has a major impact, but it is the end of a saga. The saga doesn't really end until the final kind of sentencing, which is only happening in March. I think there's a little bit of time still before we actually see the closing and feel those effects.
What's your speculation? Do you think he gets the book thrown at him, or they take it easy on him?
I feel like he gets the book thrown at him. Do I think he serves all 115 years? I doubt it. I think there's probably either something's going to happen to him or he'll get let out at some point, but I do think that he will probably get the book thrown out. Heck, it is, in like economic terms, the largest fraud in U.S. history.
Yeah, fair. I hope that we see some charges in terms of the political donations.
I don't think so. Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, I will not. I am realistic in that frame of mind, but it would be nice to see some more of this come to light, if possible. I would have no problem with it.
Yeah, you would have no problem with it, but everyone in the White House does, and so I will not be surprised if all of this stays under wraps for the rest of eternity.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on. We had Halloween, and this is marked by the Bitcoin white paper. So on October 31st, 2008, the anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page PDF explaining how Bitcoin works. It was not called a white paper back then, but it's commonly referred to as that now. He published it at bitcoin.org, where it can still be found today, and also sent an email, and he entitled it Bitcoin P2P eCash paper sent to a cryptography mailing list. He introduced Bitcoin by saying, quote, "I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party." And the white paper, close quote, the white paper emphasized the characteristics of decentralization and openness, with the main idea being to create a digital currency system that does not rely on central authorities, but instead guarantees the security of transactions through a decentralized mechanism. Now, it wasn't until, so this was on October, right? The November, beginning of November. It wasn't until January 8th that he actually started up that it actually, came online. So in another email on January 8th to the same mailing list, he released version 0.1 of Bitcoin. And it was for the software for launching and managing a node. And also it included mining in it too. And by April 2011, Satoshi had sent his last private email and kind of disappeared from the scene. And in that email saying that he had moved on to other things and the Bitcoin project was now in good hands.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about, and it would be very nuts to see what goes on. The SEC made a ridiculous tweet about this,
Oh yeah.
about Satoshi going. If Satoshi Nakamoto were to dress as himself as Halloween, no one would know. And then they made a very poor joke about how projects in the crypto space are tricking investors, and they should treat them by going and registering with the SEC, which no one can register with the SEC, and is complete buffoonery from Gary Gensler.
Yeah, it's interesting to see him even acknowledge and mention the man's name, though. Fascinating in and of itself.
It was quite fascinating, and I'm very interested to kind of see what it means in the future. Whether, this is them realizing that they need to accept Bitcoin and just keep it in their system.
Well, one thing this Bitcoin did was it really introduced just the whole concept of blockchain technology. And I thought it might be to kind of review some of the, what has Bitcoin accomplished in these 15 years. We continue to see network growth. For 15 years, it's continued to grow. This mining difficulty is at an all-time high, has been adjusted up 4 times in a row. Its hash rate is at an all-time high. It just means there's more miners and more participants in the proof of work. Daily trading volume of 13 billion with 37 billion transactions every day. So that network is, there are about 67 million addresses with a balance greater than 0. And that's out of 8 billion people. So we're still early. We're sitting at $35,000 of Bitcoin at a market cap of around 700 million compared to gold, just to put it in some context, which has a market cap of about 13 billion. You'll kind of see Bitcoin as an alternative to gold. That's kind of the next big hurdle for its adoption. So we're still more than a 10x away from that. Now, beyond these network effects that we've seen already, what are the catalysts for growth in the future? Michael Saylor was on CNBC. He kind of spoke to it a little bit. And as we see this, HODL waves chart, which you can explain a little more if you like, but 90% of Bitcoin supply HODL has not moved in the last 3 months. So the sell pressure is coming from the miners, basically, and that is we're going to see a halving next year. So we have sell pressure being cut in half from the miners and also demand growth from the spot ETFs. So we'll get into a little news from that as well. So we have reduced sell pressure, increased demand. So it's, you can look at it and say the network is going to continue to grow.
I would say that, yeah, this chart's kind of interesting. We are seeing some nice kind of storage and hodling of Bitcoin, but we're kind of at the depths of a bear market, so that makes quite a bit of sense. Even for miners, they're only going to be selling what they need to cover costs. Any profits they'll probably be waiting to take at this point, because they do believe that the price will go up
in the midterm.
Yeah, in the midterm
month of the year.
So kind of they can if they need to. So I would say, we are seeing a good amount of hodling. This makes a lot of sense. We will that number, I think, will continue climbing for the next, into the halving at the very least, and then we'll probably start kind of take a sharp downturn as people start moving Bitcoin in anticipation of the new all-time high. We might start seeing people take profits at different points. One thing that we've seen is that very recently, about 6,500 Bitcoin started moving after being in hyper for quite some time. I think they're assuming almost 10 years, or I think it's 6 years maybe. We are starting to see some of that hibernating Bitcoin moving around a little bit, although that doesn't necessarily mean that it's being moved to sell. It just means that someone's maybe reallocated some of their Bitcoin. This particular whale moved, about 6,500 Bitcoin after 6 years
Could
of
be into a
hibernation.
more secure cold storage wallet or something for all we know.
Exactly. So they could just keep sitting on it, but there was, you know, the fact that that's starting to happen, and I think we'll start seeing more and more reports of that uh, kind of the new year.
Well, we gotta read. Most of the Bitcoin has been mined, so in order for it to be redistributed, as the price goes up, people tend to sell a little bit, and it gets further decentralized. So there's a positive side to that as well.
Absolutely.
But one of the catalysts we're looking for is this spot Bitcoin ETF, and there is some news on that front. A lot of people are expecting end of this year, next year sometime, but like January 10th is kind of a big date because that's when the final deadline for, or right around January 10th, final deadline for the earliest spot ETF application, which is the ARK Invest. BlackRock BTC ETF might have trading support from heavyweights like Jane Street, Jump, and Virtue, source CoinDesk. So trading giants Jane Street, Virtu Financial, Jump Trading, and Hudson River Trading have held talks with BlackRock about a market-making role. This is a report, so this isn't anything. These groups have not responded to comments, either BlackRock or Jane Street or Virtue River. But market makers are vital to ETFs. They're responsible for creating and redeeming new shares of an ETF, a role designated to keep its price tethered to the price implied by the value of the ETF's holding. Being a market maker for ETFs, which trade on exchanges just like stocks, requires a level of sophistication and automation that only relatively few companies achieve. So, but interesting, where there's smoke, there's fire, they say. So hopefully just laying the groundwork.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to lay this groundwork. You need someone that will play this role, and the fact that there are several companies stepping forward to potentially fulfill that role and make sure that the price of the ETF stays tethered is important, especially in a market where it's a little bit harder to tether the price of Bitcoin, just because it isn't a traditional stock. Very interesting with that. We're also seeing Van Eck amend their spot Bitcoin, and they're proposing to use Bitcoin as the lead. So this was a revised version that was sent on October 27th, and they're assuming that there's going to be at least 100,000 shares outstanding, and so they must have at least 1 million in seed cap, and often more than 2.5 million. So this is super interesting. We are starting to see these ETFs talk about their seeding after BlackRock talked about we talked about that last week. So we're kind of assuming that we will see more and more ETF talk about seed funding, and that lead to buying of Bitcoin on the market. I would also assume that it means that we're much closer to approvals than not, because you're not going to talk about seed funding if you don't think you're going to get approved.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to see some numbers around saying, ETFs typically have at least 1 million and more, and often more than 2.5 million. It was the first time I kind of saw numbers in that regards. But yeah, more smoke. Now I'm waiting for the fire. I like the fire already. Although oh man, I wish prices would have stayed suppressed a little longer so I could accumulate a little more. But it is, you got to take it when it comes. But Hong Kong doesn't want to be outdone. There seems to be a little competition, possibly more smoke in terms of the spot crypto ETF. So Hong Kong is considering allowing retail access to spot exchange traded funds. The chief officer of the Securities and Futures Commission said in an interview with Bloomberg that the regulator is evaluating such retestments. The exciting quotes from the interview were this, quote, "We're happy to give it a try as long as new risks are addressed." This is speaking about the spot Bitcoin ETF. "Our approach is consistent regardless of the asset." And they also said, "We welcome proposals using innovative technology that boosts efficiency and customer experience." Now, back in June, Hong Kong officially started its crypto licensing regime for virtual assets. allowing licensed exchange to offer retail trading services. Currently, Hong Kong has 3 futures-based crypto ETFs, so similar to the United States in terms of their actual offerings. So the race is on.
I mean, the race is on in some senses of the word. I think this is
I
just
mean, first to market matters, right?
yes and no because of how the stock markets work. You don't necessarily have a great, number like or greater access to Hong Kong ETF than you would American
Yeah,
ETFs.
I guess that's for the overall size of the market because Canada has a spot Bitcoin ETF, so that's fair. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
we've got spot Bitcoin ETFs. Like we don't necessarily
Yeah, the
don't.
dwarfs the others. I mean, that's
Yeah, that's it, and you can't exactly get access to the American market as a Canadian or a Canadian. An American doesn't necessarily have access to the Canadian market. It's self-isolating. You just want to be the first in your own market to be out there.
interesting. Well, another story we've been following is the presidential race in Argentina. There was a very interesting story. Well, so there's kind of this. There's Sergio Massa, who's from the current ruling party. So he came out and said that they want to use some of their what was it? Both candidates have shown announced plans to mine Bitcoin with excess natural gas. Yeah, with natural gas. So he's kind of come out with a pro Bitcoin stance. Did you see this?
I hadn't seen this, and I thought that one kind of hear this from you. I thought this was pretty massive. It does show that people are seeing at least the economic value in terms of helping stabilize a current, not necessarily as legal tender. So I think that's an important thing is that neither Massa or Malay is kind of saying we'll make it legal tender like it happened in El Salvador, but they're talking about you at least as part of a stabilization of inflation within the Argentinian economy, which I think is major because it's one of the economies with runaway inflation.
True, and like this Massa guy, he's been a part of that party when the inflation took off, and then you had this guy come out of nowhere, Javier Milei, Libertarian Party, kind of coming out against central banking, considered pro Bitcoin, and Sergio, and then now Sergio Massa has kind of responded, pretty savvy, movie of putting some pro Bitcoin. It's almost like no wins, Bitcoin wins in Argentina. But yeah, neither one of them are talking like El Salvador making it legal tender.
Yeah, I think that's important, but I think that the fact that they are talking about it is pretty
Yeah,
cool.
pretty. Yeah. There's also another story. Speaking of legal tender, Taiwan has officially taken some major steps towards the recognition of Bitcoin as legal tender.
That's
Yeah, Taiwan
totally
in
other
a
side of the world from El Salvador, but like this new draft crypto act is pretty big to consider Bitcoin as legal tender.
Yeah, so on October, Taiwan's legislative body formally proposed a draft, and it passed through reading. So kind of like in the States, it's got to go through a couple of times. There's going to be another reading, or it's a little bit confusing in terms of when. There will be a second reading of the bill, I read in one story, at the end of January, and I also saw in another story that the bill could take effect as early as January 1st. So a little confusion there, but that should probably clear up. But the proposed, according to the bill, Bitcoin will be treated as a legal means of payment for all public and private transactions in Taiwan, as well as a store of value and unit account. The bill also recognizes Bitcoin as a foreign currency for purposes of foreign exchange and trade. Now, interestingly, the bill faced strong opposition from China, calling it a provocative and illegal act that would severely damage cross-strait relations and regional peace and stability. And I just quote from you as watching. I mean, interesting to see how this plays out.
Absolutely. I think it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. I'm quite intrigued to see whether they pass it, whether this will if China get in the way, I mean, we have seen hostilities increase. So is this something China to kind of say and act? If you do like our content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. Share it with a friend. It really helps boost us with the algorithm and helps our content reach more people. So thank you, and join us in macro.
Yeah, we're looking for that network effect as well.
Very much so.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, but some big news this week in macro. We had a FOMC no hike and a bunch of unemployment data came out.
Yeah, I mean the no hike was as expected. We talked it was highly unlikely that we were going to see a hike, but the messaging from the Fed has turned dovish, I would say, in terms of the likelihood of future hikes have really dramatically decreased. Looking towards December, which is our next expectations have dropped from almost 25% a week ago to just
Right.
about 10% now. So that's a pretty dramatic drop. And looking out towards March, the of rate hikes have still dropped to as low as 6.5% in May. With
Was it something in the unemployment number?
I think the unemployment numbers are playing the unemployment numbers. We were expecting gains of about 150,000 and 180,000, and we only got about 180,000 in terms of overall job gains, much lower than expected. But we're also seeing some pretty negative unemployment numbers in terms of an increase in the unemployment.
I thought like continued benefits. So people continuing to seek benefits, which can sometimes be a leading indicator in that they're having trouble finding work, like getting out of the unemployment too. So a couple of cracks showing in the system a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, several cracks showing it on the employment marks, and I think this is kind of signaling that maybe the terminal rate has been achieved. There's no guarantee. As I said, there's still 10% of analysts forecasting a rate hike in there, and
And we do have some pretty big out this week. The
yeah,
numbers keep coming.
yeah, and we've got 0% currently forecasting a cut. Cuts are only really coming into the forecast in March, with 21.5% expecting a cut in March. We're really not seeing people expecting cuts at least this year, and we're not really seeing any likelihood of an increase, with big numbers coming also having potential massive impact. We've got CPI, PPI, both coming out. CPI is coming out on the 14th, with previous CPI, core CPI coming in at overall CPI coming in at 0.4. We're going to be eagerly waiting to see how that changes next week on Tuesday. And then it's coming out on Wednesday next week, with people watching to see whether that comes down as well. Already approaching the 2% terminal rate, at least on PPI over year, but core PPI is still at percent, so still compared to
And from what I've heard, it's just that final percentage point is the hardest to get.
exactly. I mean, I've definitely noticed in the grocery store in Canada that in the last month or so, that price of food has really things like do you guys get pizza pockets on the Big Island?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a product I'm watching, but because I don't particularly buy it, so I don't
I
feel it
don't
as much.
either.
But food is expensive. Yeah.
I don't buy it either, but it's always freezer racks in our frozen food section, and 2 years ago, year and a half ago, a 12-pack pizza pockets was a year ago, 9 even. I saw it jumped up to 12. I went last week and they were now $14
Yeah.
on a on an originally $10 product, you're up $4. So you're talking an almost 40% increase in the cost of that.
Food is a big expense, and it just affects everybody. And I've certainly noticed food costs going up for myself. There's no doubt about it. I don't know. I know we talked about it in a while, but their $1.50 for a hot dog and a Coke is basically a public service at this point.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
God bless them.
Oh, absolutely. My girlfriend and I have been like a little bit more cost on our grocery shopping and choosing not to buy certain products either because their costs have gone too much or we better prioritize our elsewhere.
Yeah. I've
It's
certainly been trying to cook at home more
oh,
than I ever have.
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Absolutely. That was always one of my big expenses, just eating out. And it's like, no. But you start to notice the grocery store prices going up even more when you're eating at home. You're like, oh my gosh.
Oh, that's it.
It's not even that much cheaper than eating out. It's just you get the leftovers. So you save money there.
Well, it's it. We've definitely been like looking at how we stretch a bit. A huge thing of rice for can really stretch
Right.
still
Right.
from if
Right.
if you need to.
Fair.
That being said, the Federal Reserve, other than their announcement about the FOMC and their decision, has threatened to sue Bitcoin Magazine. This is
Yeah, this is a wild story.
this is absolutely hilarious in terms of a story, but also kind of a reality of the world. Bitcoin Magazine is being faced with action to silence the criticism of the newly now interbank settlement and the Federal Reserve is basically disputing of their FedNow service image mark in line with merchandise that's being sold by Bitcoin Magazine. So Bitcoin Magazine is created merchandise with some interesting images that also use the FedNow image and has kind of gotten the Federal Reserve all up in hairs, especially because it is all about criticizing the new service. We're seeing Bitcoin Magazine, which has penned an open letter to the Federal Reserve and their
Oh, the
deputy
response is
counsel.
correct.
They've basically informed me that we've received your cease and desist request, and we refuse to comply. We will not be in. Another kind of excerpt of their explanation from the letter is that Bitcoin Magazine is exercising its First Amendment rights to social commentary and parody. I'm sure that you'll notice that the all-seeing eye that symbolizes the state of total financial surveillance that your agency is seeking to impose on the American financial system. So, coming out pretty strongly against Fed
Pretty
now,
clear
and
how they feel about it.
yeah, it'll be interesting if the Federals and
I gained like a ton of respect for Bitcoin Magazine. That was awesome. I mean, there was so bold. I mean, it's just beautiful. What I mean? It reminds me of some Javier Milei when he's speaking. I don't know if you've ever seen that guy speak in an interview or anything. He's just so animated, fired up all the time. It's just such a fired up comment. I love to see it.
yeah, it's pretty nuts. I do love this kind of balance. They're citing law, and I would think that it's not totally out of line with their stating. That being said, the SEC has acknowledged that they're having trouble recruiting crypto experts because they are diamond-handed psychopaths, in
Yeah.
their own words. They
No, well, the Diamond Hand and Psychopaths was my interpretation of the letter.
okay, fine.
Yeah. To be clear.
The SEC is requiring anyone that joins them as a crypto expert elder. So, you're not going to find an expert on cryptocurrency who doesn't hold in crypto. This is something that's super interesting from the SEC, and it makes sense that they're going to recruit anybody that's a real expert.
Yeah, it's kind of like a whiny sounding letter. It's just like, oh, we're having trouble. And these are some. It's like, yeah, well,
What do you
This is a
expect?
psychopath with.
There's only
Yeah.
one person that I know that deals with a lot of crypto who doesn't actually hold any, and so I could only recommend one person for the job and take it. So, good luck, SEC. You're probably not going to find some real expert.
Now subpoena PayPal.
I mean, they're
So they're still picking fights, even can't seem to, find any recruits.
yeah, they're PayPal's disclosed that they received a CC, and we don't know the extent of it, but that they're seeking documents and that PayPal is actively cooperating. This is pretty interesting because, you'd think PayPal and their stablecoin would be safe in this kind of scenario. They're more TradFi than you'd say. But, maybe they're not TradFi enough, and so their involvement in cryptocurrency is making them a target for the SEC. Very, very odd, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a critical view on it, and this is coming from was issued by Paxos, and weren't they sued? Didn't it have something to do with BUSD?
Yes, they did have USD shut down, so this is maybe not totally unexpected, but I'd be intrigued if
I
something
mean, when you're talking
changes.
about a stablecoin, you're talking about an issuance of like a digital new form of money that compete with the U.S. dollar, and this is a U.S. It's not like Tether, which is kind of offshore. This is a U.S. company, PayPal, so they're just getting maybe a little bit different treatment for that reason.
Yeah, I would say maybe they're the SEC is trying to make sure that the way is as clear as possible for CBDC. I
Yeah.
would think that's the only thing that I can think of for why we would then,
They're peeing on their territory.
yeah, that they're like, you can't be a U.S. company trying to create a U.S. stablecoin. Um, go.
Like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, push all the end of shore. Well, we do have kind of our final story. I mean, this is a bit of speculation, bit of FUD, but it was interesting reporting. So there's an Ethereum Insider. This is attorney and former advisor for Ethereum, Narayoff. He recently published a kind of shocking piece on X, formerly Twitter, on Thursday. He is a lawyer who has personal knowledge of ETH, having worked for the blockchain network previously, and he has come forward with some allegations, some pretty explosive allegations regarding the actions of Ethereum founders Vitalik Buterin and Joseph Lubin. Now, before we get into it, I do want to note that with these accusations, he has not provided any concrete evidence to support the claims. Also, in September, he accused Vitalik Buterin and his father, Dmitry Buterin, of a combined effort to ruin his reputation by accusing him. So there's, clearly some bad blood between these former people that used to work together. But anyway, very off. The two Ethereum founders have allegedly orchestrated fraudulent activities regarding the ETH blockchain that exceed the scale of the actions committed by former CEO of Sam Bankman-Fried. So, this settled kind of a famous huge fraud case, and he's saying, well, this one's even bigger. So this is the quote. Ethereum is the fraudulent elephant in the room in plain sight, 1,000 times SPF. He disclosed that founders Joseph Lubin and Vitalik, he also alleges that they have been colluding with corrupt U.S. government officials from some of the highest federal agencies. Quote, Joe Lubin and Buterin have been at the front with corrupt officials at the highest levels of federal agencies, such as Clayton, to former U.S. SEC chairperson Jay Clayton, and many others. Again, the claims are not yet verified, but have raised questions and concerns among many crypto community members that Ethereum's corruption runs deep and high, allowing the platform to have an unfair advantage in the crypto space. Did you see this story? I mean,
I hadn't heard about it until you said it, and you brought it up that you wanted to talk about it on the show. I'll just note that they have delayed the decon update until 2024. So delaying the bringing on of proto-dank sharding and lower gas fees could have to do with the current low fees on the network. But I mean, to me, some of his accusations of colluding with government officials could literally be them helping inform regulation, playing a part in making sure that ETH is compliant with future US regulation, and that maybe they're playing a role just like SPF was playing in inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So this colluding with corrupt is a pretty stretch in term, and like a real reach to me in terms of accusations. Like, without any evidence, it's like,
Right.
oh, he met with Gary Gensler to help talk about why ETH is compliant. Like, that's not colluding. That's not actually.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Gensler met with Sam Bankman-Fried.
Like, I mean, it doesn't matter if they're potentially working with government officials. To me, that's actually a good sign that they're working with government officials, because it means that ETH is probably safe and won't get, accused of being a security or anything else and get tied up in a years-long lawsuit, multiple years long, like Ripple. So to me, this is kind of like a nothing burger. Like, this is actually probably good news if he's accusing them of me and working with high level officials in the US government. This accusation of fraud, I would love to see either
Some evidence.
I would love to see proof in the initial ETH ICO or within blockchain transactions that prove the fraud. This to me sounds like someone that got laid off. Potentially were downsizing and maybe having a bit of harder time in this
Or maybe
bear
they had
market.
each other and they left,
Yeah, maybe they just didn't see eye to eye and they left. And so to me, like, maybe Narioff thinks that working with the U.S. government is not the right thing to do, and that's why he's calling it colluding and thinks all of the SEC is corrupt. To me, that is just like, he's not doing himself any favors,
Well,
especially with the language that he uses.
I still think it's worth noting because it was, I mean, remember when CZ kind of started a few things, kind of calling out Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah,
And that kind of started, so it's like, you don't want to ignore this type of FUD, but I mean, hey, show me something. It's blockchain, where's some evidence? But it's still worth noting, keep a side eye on.
I will say this. Like, I get the comparison to CZ and SPF, but CZ was making, like, there was very clear accusations that were being made of
Right.
basically,
Right,
like, they were taking loans against like that's a clear accusation.
And when people started looking at it, there was something to look at. Here, not as much yet.
Yeah, you're accusing them of colluding with government officials. What does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
we haven't seen ETH be, officially declared a non-security. We haven't seen ETH have all other cryptocurrencies. Like, I anything. There's to me, there's not even smoke. There's Twitter.
So fair enough. Fair.
This is kind of where I love X for you can get information quickly, but sometimes the things that maybe gain traction don't really have any meat to them.
The sensationalism of it, yeah. Gets play.
Exactly. But that being said,
Well,
we're not sensational news. We're here to really provide you guys with unfiltered, true content, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode and consider subscribing to catch the videos as soon as they drop. We're trying to help the whole space grow, and we're not looking to provide financial advice because we're not financial advisors, so we're presenting this for educational and entertainment purposes only. And we want to thank you for your support, and